What's up guys, it's Double Zug. So we got some surprise balance changes to both healers that begin with Holy. So they are addressing my concerns in the previous video I made about both Paladin and Holy Priest not getting touched at all. These are some interesting, pretty impactful changes. Starting with Holy Paladin, Devotion Aura is buffed to now affect non-magical damage. This is not like a huge, massive change, but it just means this cooldown's a lot more flexible and it's going to be valuable on every single fight instead of just magical damage fights. And again, you know, the developer's note says it's making it more comparable to Power Word Barrier. This is true. It's stronger in some ways given that it's ranged, but weaker in some ways given that it has like less duration. But overall, I think this is a good change, but like not game-breaking change. The second change Holy Paladin gets is that Seal of Insight now has a chance to restore 4% of the Holy Paladin's base mana when striking a target in a non-PvP environment. This is a revert, and I've just been testing this, so you see I've just been meleeing the raid target dummy here. If I just spend a whole bunch of mana, you can see that every time this procs, it's generating 12k mana, so I'm not sure if it's intended for it to be 100% chance to restore 4% base mana. That's like really incredible. I'm also not sure exactly how the procs work on this effect, if it's a proc per minute or if it's just like a flat percentage of all your attacks to proc. But just like you see, I've been meleeing for a long time here. I have like 191 melee hits and 4 other things. So it's 195 hits and I have 111 procs. So that's like a 56% proc per swing. And I do believe it can proc off of Judgment and Crusader Strike as well. So that's like kind of crazy, right? If we have like, let's say we have 1.8 speed caster weapon, which is what we have here. So we have 1.9, our attack speed's 1.8 with haste. That's like 0.5 attacks per second or like 0.3 procs per second, which is, if we get 12k mana per proc, that's like almost 4,000 mana a second just from having melee uptime, which is like 20k MP5. So this is like incredibly powerful. Again, I'm not sure if this is actually intended to proc every single time Seal of Insight procs, but this is equivalent to like 33,000 spirit or something. This is insane. This basically means you have infinite mana as long as you are standing in melee range and not casting all the time. But let's say like even if we literally have half uptime on this, it's still like 16k spirit worth of regen. This is an insane change. Again, not sure if this is intended to proc every single time Seal of Insight procs. But if it does, this means that Holy Paladin basically has infinite mana and it's just going to be gated by like enough haste to actually fit all their globals in. And again, like if we look at, let's say we're just checking our like Eternal Flame, right? If we add even the equivalent of 50% uptime, it's like 16k spirit, up to 24k spirit, that's like a 30% healing increase on Eternal Flame. And it's like 50k HPS. So this is like a very, very, very significant change. Pretty huge buff and definitely needed. This is also going to, I think, make Spirit basically useless for Holy Paladin, and it's going to make haste significantly better. Depending on like how this proc is supposed to work, it seems a little bit crazy to me that it's intended to give you 12,000 mana every single time and also proc at like 60% on every swing. And like your CS and Judgment. Also, previously we did not really want to press Crusader Strike because it was very, very expensive compared to Cataclysm, but also it could miss now as well as dodge because we don't get hit cap on it from our passives or from Spirit anymore. So Crusader Strike was like pretty bad, but with like a 50% chance to give you 12,000 mana back and be actually mana positive, Crusader Strike becomes really good, which also makes haste even better because then you can just spam all your builders. Very, very interesting stuff here and very significant, like, 30% buff to Holy Paladin that will also potentially change your playstyle quite significantly with like Crusader Strike being good. So Holy Paladin definitely in like a much better position now with all this mana regen, pushing it up into the range where like it's a lot less embarrassing to have one, even though they don't really do any damage. But again, this is all contingent on the fact that like this isn't bugged, that every single time Insight is proccing, it's giving you 12,000 mana, which does seem a little bit absurd to me to just have infinite mana if you're in melee. Also, forcing you to be in melee is a little bit of a downgrade for the playstyle, right? Previously, you didn't really care about being in melee range, but now it's very, very important. So that's Paladin. Now let's talk about the other healer that begins with Holy Priest. So Holy Priest got a couple of changes here. One of them is a little bit weird. I don't really understand why it happened, but a little bit interesting. Not really a buff, this mastery change, but we'll talk about that at the end. But these are pretty significant buffs. We have our healing holy words buffed significantly, Oddly enough, the AoE one is buffed more than the single target one, despite the fact that single target style is much worse than AoE already. 60% more healing from Holy Word Sanctuary, so that's, our AoE effect here. One thing to mention is it does seem to be bugged now and not generating Mastery. It generates Mastery and Cataclysm, and it did previously on the beta, so something to keep your eye on here, but 60% on this is quite significant. Plus, it was also had its mana cost reduced to 2.5%. These two changes together are about 5 to 6% increase, like 10k HPS in Phase 1 BIS. So pretty significant, although keep in mind you cannot move Holy Word Sanctuary, so on fights where there's lots of movement, this is going to be, a lot less of an overall increase to our healing. When it comes to single target styles, Serenity being increased by 40% is only like a 2.5 to 3% increase to single target style, and single target style is just like considerably worse than AoE by a wide enough margin that it's basically non-viable. Just because like your AoE boosting all of your 90 row talents, even with the target cap nerfed situation of 90 row talents, is still just so much HPS, and Prayer of Healing is just like much more efficient than the single target stuff. Even if you're like triple binding heal, renewing all your renews and all that stuff, single target just falls quite significantly behind. So, not super hugely important because we're going to be in AoE anyways. So basically a 5 to 6% buff. The mastery change here is a little weird. It basically just means that our mastery is going to be doing like the same amount of healing. You can see here if I flash heal myself 51k and I'm going to get 6 ticks of like 1800. So it's still the same healing, 21%, but now, instead of healing every 3 seconds for a bigger chunk, it's going to heal every 1 second for a smaller chunk. So again, not like an actual increase, but will slightly smooth out your healing done and probably reduce your overhealing a little bit. So this change not super important. The last change is like actually pretty important here. So Divine Hymn now heals up to 50 targets regardless of raid size. Developers notes mention that this was hitting a lot of pets and stuff and just wasting a lot of ticks, which could be hugely harmful to your healing, where it was like 5 and 12 capped in 10 and 25 man. So this basically means that all 4 ticks of your hymn, which does not get extra ticks from haste, by the way, anymore, all 4 of those ticks of hymn are going to hit like the entire raid and all the pets. And meaningfully, this is going to apply that 10% healing buff for 8 seconds that you can see up here to the entire raid for the duration of the hymn, and then also 8 seconds after the hymn. And the value of that 10% increased healing is actually very significant, especially in a 25 man where there's like, 4 or 5 other healers blasting into the raid. You get a huge amount of indirect value from that, but also the direct value of this is quite significant. So you can see here 10 hits in 10 man, 25 and 25, and before it was 5 and 12. And you can see before it was doing like 230 out to 100 HPM. It's doubling it in 10 man and like more than doubling it in 25. So this cooldown is now incredibly powerful, again with the direct healing it's doing as well as with that healing amp. And like in terms of our overall HPS, it's about a 14.5% increase. So both of these things together is going to be, 20% more healing for the AoE style of Holy Priest, which is very significant. However, the fact that it is mostly stacked inside this one cooldown means that like our overall rot healing is not really going to be even comparable to how it was before with the pre-nerfed Divine Star and pre-nerf Halo, but this does definitely help Holy Priest a lot. So those are the changes to Paladin and Priest. Pretty significant, especially for Paladin here, although Paladin definitely needed it, and I don't think this is going to like push Paladin into being overpowered or even necessarily meta. It's just going to make them much, much better. To round off here, I'll just mention that I've been doing a lot of math on the Mistweaver stuff, and it definitely seems like these were pretty good changes. I think they're overall like decently balanced. I think that the Glyph of Uplift mana cost is pretty good, and this definitely pushed up Fistweaving quite significantly. It's like a 32% increase to the healing of pure Fistweaving style, and Fistweaving style with like Juen is the highest damage by a significant amount. However, the other playstyles like, Rushing Jade Wind playstyles, Crackling Jade Lightning playstyles are still decently comparable and like in the range of viability and being situationally useful. And the amount of damage you lose for not going pure Fistweaving is not like hugely significant unless you do something really degenerate like filling with Soothing Mists instead of Crackling Jade Lightning. So overall, I do think if this tuning goes forward, Mistweaver is going to be like probably one of in 25 man pretty solidly and also like very, very strong in 10-man. Lacking those DR cooldowns is still a big deal, but this amount of throughput is really powerful and doing insane damage as well. That you kind of fit the role of Discipline Priest minus the absorbs and the cooldowns, right? That Discipline Priest used to bring insane damage and insane throughput and insane cooldowns and absorbs, whereas now Mistweaver kind of brings one half of that with the really good damage and really good throughput, and Disc brings the other half of that, which is the damage plus cooldowns plus absorbs. So I do think the days of the double triple disc in 25 man are kind of over, and I do think Mistweaver stocks are up well enough that you will want to be bringing one to a 25 man. I'm not sure if they're like super stackable, and I'm not sure if in 10 man you want to give up like Spirit Shell and Barrier, but I do think it's totally possible to make that argument. And I also do like that the glyph of Uplift and just normal Chi Uplift playstyles are actually decently close in both damage and HPS. However, I do think that the default playstyle is going to be taking Zwen and kind of filling with like spam jab Targar Palm. You're going to end up with a huge amount of excess mana if you play this way. Mistweaver is incredibly mana efficient with the new jab mana cost changes. And so even with like 0 spirit, you're going to have a lot of excess mana to use on uplifts in your Thunder Focus T windows. And then outside of those windows, you won't really be uplifting. I think that's going to be like the default playstyle for most fights, and default taking Zwen, although Rushing Jade Wind does a lot of healing despite having lower single target. So there's a lot of options here. A lot of the playstyles are, again, within a few percentage points of each other in HPS and damage. I'm really liking how Mistweaver is looking here. I hope they maintain this balancing going forward. And if they do want to buff or nerf Mistweaver further, just do like aura buffs. I think the way things have settled here is actually really good in terms of like the mana cost numbers and the CJL damage healing stuff. Also, one last thing to mention is that the new Eminence scaling, I wasn't sure if this was going to affect your auto attack Eminence healing, but it does seem to be doing that on the beta, so actually a more significant buff than I thought it was before. All right, so that's my little Mistweaver end off there. Thanks for watching the video. Again, I'll be coming out with guides and stuff. I'll be releasing these spreadsheets as well with the guides once they're like actually finished and a little bit more polished. So if you're interested in that, definitely like, subscribe, comment any questions. I also have a Discord if you're interested. Thanks for watching. See ya.